Now that we've entered October, there's some other sports here competing for airtime. Hockey season's about to start, NBA season's around the corner. You got baseball playoffs going on. But look, it's football season still. Stay focused. You got to keep your priorities straight. And I don't just mean your waiver wire priorities. Look, if you want to win, you still got plenty of season left. Doesn't matter if you got a losing record. It is not over. It's far from over. Just look at how many teams are already turning things around after slow starts in the NFL. So, be proactive. Let's pick up some players that can help you win now and in the future. And real quick, one other way you can be proactive, subscribe to this channel if you haven't done it yet. For some reason, still close to 70% of our viewers have not yet clicked that subscribe button. It's easy to do. It helps us out. We're on the way to 100K. Help us reach our goal. Before I tell you about the top waiver wire pickups for this coming week, start with the good news. The injury report is minuscule. Hardly any big injuries. In fact, hopefully the only one that really should matter for fantasy is hopefully not a big one, although it's still too early to say. So Omari and Hampton, you saw in that game, left early. He seems like he got his foot banged up against the defender, and he was testing it out on the sideline, which indicates that number one, it wasn't too serious, and number two, he was actually thinking about going back in, but it didn't happen. Now that makes it seem like it's no big deal, but after the game, he was spotted wearing a walking boot. Now, as far as that goes, just because a player is wearing a walking boot doesn't mean it's necessarily something serious. We've seen players, have a boot after the game and then go out and practice and be fine the next week. But we still are in the very early stages, don't know anything here. So let's just keep in mind, if you have been rolling with Hampton, you may need a plan B. Hopefully not. I'm not going to go tell you to pick up Hassan Haskins right now. I mean, even if Hampton was ruled out, I'm not sure I would really say that anyways, but let's just see what happens here. And then another week, another New York Giants receiver goes down. Clearly, Darius Slayton injury not nearly as impactful as Malik Neighbors. I talked about Slayton last week, thought he could fill in for Neighbors, be that deep threat. Well, he left with a hamstring injury, so there's that. And we're not sure if he's going to miss some time, but it's safe to say that even if he doesn't, you don't have to hold on to him. And then probably a big nothing here is Carson Wentz. Well, he exited that game in London briefly, came back with a shoulder harness, and then led a game-winning drive. And the Vikings are off next week. The question is whether J.J. McCarthy is going to be healthy, and is he even going to contend for the starting job? So this is still something to monitor as far as who's the quarterback after the Vikings bye week. All right, now let's talk top pickups heading into week 6. As usual, disclaimer, these aren't necessarily in order of priority. It always depends on, what your team needs, who else is available on your waiver wire, etc., etc. I will generally go in order according to who I think should be the strongest pickup, but also in terms of roster percentage, some of the players I'll talk about earlier, you're less likely to get in a competitive league, and then I'll save the lower owned players for the end. It seems like every week we've got a different rookie running back having a breakout game. Last week, it was guys like Ashton Genty and Woody Marks. So much for that. This week, finally, Bill. Victory laps for everyone who ever mentioned Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt at any point. I know a lot of you have been stashing Bill, waiting for Bill to break out, hoping that this would happen. Nobody thought it would happen this week on the road against the Chargers defense with really no indication that they would need it because Jay Daniels was back. But, that's how football works. So in week 5, we saw Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt with 111 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. But more importantly here is the fact that it's not just that he was productive, of course, not just the touchdowns. He had 14 carries where Chris Rodriguez and Jeremy McNichols combined for just 6. That tells us it may actually no longer be an ugly 3-headed monster, and it may just be Bill as the 1A and those guys giving him a breather. It's not guaranteed. Let me just reiterate that. This is one game, right? We don't know for sure that this is going to be the way it goes and that JCM all of a sudden is going to get the bulk of the carries every game going forward. It just makes sense, but then again, it doesn't have to make sense. But then again, if you've been stashing Bill, now you feel good. And if you haven't, look, he's still available in some leagues. People didn't have the patience. You're in a shallow league, wasn't sure if he was worth the roster spot. He is. Now, probably the best pickup he could have made before week 5 was Rachaad White. And this is one of those things that happens midweek. We didn't know about the Bucky Irving injury on Sunday. This was something that kind of came out of nowhere. And sometimes the best waiver wire pickups, again, are guys that pop up unexpectedly. But not everybody picked up Rachaad White. I mean, if you had Bucky, hopefully you did, because Rachaad White did pay off. In fact, he also scored 2 touchdowns. modest production on the ground, only 41 yards rushing on 14 carries, but also in typical Rachaad White fashion, he was productive as a receiver, caught 4 passes for 30 yards. And you just know that you want a piece of the backfield for these high octane offenses. Tampa is that. It doesn't even matter here. We keep saying that, like with Baker Mayfield, he doesn't care what the matchup is. A tough road game, supposedly, against a good Seattle defense, allegedly. Doesn't matter. They put up 38 points. They won, even without their starting running back, even without their number one receiver, Mike Evans, even with Godwin not 100%. Doesn't matter. So, look, Rachaad White is a starting running back here. He is a starting running back in fantasy in almost every league. Now, we don't know what Bucky Irving's status is going to be for next week, and that's what makes it tough because you might be picking up Rachaad White here and then see Bucky Irving back in the lineup, and Rachaad White is back to being the 1B. But at the same time, there's always re-injury risk, even if a guy does come back too soon, or maybe Bucky Irving does miss another game. But Rachaad White does have some standalone value, and that's why he's worth adding as long as you're not in a super shallow league. One player we were telling you not to drop just yet was Calvin Ridley. It was hard to hold on and to keep faith here. In fact, we have to have this discussion. Is this going to be Amari Cooper 2.0, right? Is age catching up to him? Is he demotivated? Like, what's going on here? Is just this team that bad? And then we got the unexpected answer in multiple forms in week 5. Tennessee won the game. There's that. First of all, Titans won a game. Calvin Ridley, not only was he the leading target here, he had a good game on 10 targets, which did lead the team. Got 5 receptions for 131 yards. Unfortunately, didn't find the end zone, but still, this is what we've been hoping for. Just the fact he was actually productive, had that long downfield reception. And, Cam Ward is not the issue here. It's not bad quarterback play. It's bad offensive line play. And it's been Calvin Ridley himself just not being effective. And the ironic thing here was that a lot of people did drop Ridley because he was on the injury report this week. We weren't sure he was going to play. He was questionable with a knee and ankle, all of these issues. So this is when he decides to actually show up. Will he show up next week? He might, because the Titans next week do get the Raiders, and the Raiders have allowed the second most receptions to wide receivers on the season so far, and the 4th most fantasy points per game to that position. How about a player who did absolutely nothing this week? Yeah, a lot of people might have dropped Juwan Jennings because dude just can't seem to stay healthy. This whole offense can't stay healthy. But I think it's obvious that if he's playing, you want a part of this offense just anywhere you can get it. When you see guys like Kendrick Bourne put up big games, Mac Jones is looking basically like a Brock Purdy clone. If Juwan Jennings is out there and he's healthy, which it sounds like he could return in week 6, it was a rib injury. It seems like it's just kind of more soreness, not a fracture, anything significant. There's a good chance he's back, and there's a good chance he's still floating around your waiver wire because somebody just didn't want to hold on here. You can pick him up because he's still going to be at least one of the top 2 targets for this team. And also a reminder that Brandon Ayuk doesn't sound exactly positive. They're saying that they're not even sure when he could be ready back at all. George Kittle, like he's supposed to be back, but now they're saying he might return as soon as he's eligible. So this could be a great week for Juwan Jennings, and also Ricky Pearsall, of course, missed last week. So keep an eye out. Look if Jennings was dropped in your league anywhere. If those receivers aren't out there, good chance you might find Rashid Shaheed. He hadn't done a whole lot this season either, and can't call the Saints a high octane offense, but they looked pretty good so far. I mean, Spencer Rattler, for his part, he's not turning the ball over a ton. He's throwing it plenty. And look, there's some value here in this passing offense. And let's face it, they're going to need to pass the ball plenty this year because they're usually playing from behind. Well, Rashid Shaheed is not a guy who depends on volume, right? He needs those big plays and finally hit on one. And it was a pretty big one. It was an 87-yard touchdown against the Giants last week. We know there's volatility here, right? Sometimes he'll hit those long receptions, sometimes he won't. What is worth noting here is the fact that Shaheed, we already know he's kind of like the number 2 receiver behind Chris Olave. But guys like Juwan Johnson, who were getting heavy targets the first couple of weeks, and all of a sudden he is falling off. Only 2 receptions in week 5. Alvin Kamara, basically all season, isn't being used a lot as a receiver like he has been his whole career. Not in this Kellen Moore offense. He had 4 receptions this past game. That's not a lot for him. And those other receivers like Brandon Cooks, Devon Vele, 1 catch each. Those guys are basically not involved. Now, if you're hunting for a tight end on the waiver wire this week, you're in luck. I'm going to have way more tight ends to talk about than could ever possibly have imagined or hoped for. And I get it, you may need one. Brock Bowers still hurt. As I already said, George Kittle, not sure when he's going to be ready to return. Juwan Johnson's looking droppable. Pitts, who knows? I mean, Travis Kelce, is he even worth starting? This is why we always hammer this point home, and some people don't listen. You do not need to draft a tight end super early. There's always guys available on the waiver wire, like Darren Waller. Yes, if the year 2025 wasn't crazy enough, we're talking about Darren Waller as a potential league winner at the tight end position and being more valuable than guys like Travis Kelce. This is 3 touchdowns in 2 games so far. And again, this is the only 2 games he has played yet. He's still working back into football shape after not even playing football for a year. Darren Waller is not just catching touchdowns, but as you can imagine, with Tyreek Hill out, plenty of targets to go around that Miami offense, and not a whole lot of receivers worth targeting. And so, what happened? We see Darren Waller here, right behind Jalen Waddle in terms of target share. Waller caught all 5 of his targets for 78 yards and a score. And there was some interest around Malik Washington. Mentioned him as a possible, young player who could step up. Well, Malik Washington also got 5 targets, and he caught 4 of them for 0 yards. You'd say, I'm not sure how that's even possible, but if you've seen the Dolphins offense, then you know how it's possible. Meanwhile, they're using Darren Waller down the field for those long receptions, kind of like they did for Jonnu Smith last year. He more than doubled his snap share compared to last week. He's going to be on the field even more because they need him, and he's getting back into shape. And they're using more 2 tight end sets here. Waller's not out there to block, okay? He's going to be used heavily as a receiver probably the rest of the season. We're just going to have to accept it. Now, the quarterback change in Cleveland, I did say a little bit earlier this past week, I don't think this makes me feel good about the receivers like Jerry Jeudy and Isaiah Bonds. Is like, okay, maybe a deep stash. This could be a bump for the tight ends because a guy like Gabriel going to do more short intermediate passing, right? Probably more targets to those tight ends. This just makes sense. But the problem is who? Which one, right? Is he going to target his fellow rookie Fannin, or is it going to be David Njoku? We got our answer in Gabriel's first start. David Njoku was the leading receiver for Cleveland and finally had his first actual good game of the season, including his first touchdown. It wasn't just that touchdown, he had 6 receptions for 67 yards against a good Vikings defense, and he definitely out-targeted Fannin. He had 9 compared to 4 targets for Harold Fannin. And Njoku was just out there more too. He also ran 12 more routes. So this is just one game. As I'll keep telling you, we can't just decide this is it. This is how it's going to be the rest of the way. But it makes sense that Njoku is going to get more attention here. And look, I think Dylan Gabriel is going to continue to target both tight ends more than Joe Flacco was, other than week 1, which seems like an aberration now. But Gabriel acquitted himself well. He was accurate, right? Wasn't throwing interceptions, was efficient, if not exciting. And that's okay because that's actually pretty good for a tight end, not so much a receiver like Jeudy, though. So if Njoku was dropped in one of your leagues, I think it's fine. Go ahead and scoop him up, assuming Darren Waller isn't available. If you're looking for a quarterback that you can actually stream, meaning he is available in some leagues, going into week 6, this answer seems almost too obvious. It's Matthew Stafford. And not just the way Stafford has been playing, after being pretty mediocre the first couple of weeks. Now he's got back-to-back weeks with 3 touchdowns and over 350 yards. And it just so happens he gets to face the Baltimore Ravens defense that has allowed 4 passing touchdowns to a quarterback in back-to-back weeks. It's no secret here that the Ravens are looking like the worst defense in the NFL. I mean, we thought it was the Cowboys. I'm not sure anymore. I think the Ravens have got it clinched. The fact that this seems so obvious makes me a little nervous, right? When a guy has 2 really good games and, you feel like he's just 2 for a letdown. And of course, Baltimore's defense, you figure they might show some pride. So while this might seem too obvious, am I going to go with Stafford or am I going to go with somebody like Tua who come off a decent game? A CJ Stroud, hope he does it again against a non-Baltimore defense. No, I'm just going to stick with Stafford. And I'll say really the rest of the streaming quarterback availability here doesn't excite me. I would rather not have to fall back to Bryce Young, but you know what? At least he gets the Cowboys. All the players I've talked about so far are typically owned in more than half of fantasy leagues, and now the ones who are probably going to be fought for on the waiver wire if they haven't been picked up. I know a lot of our viewers have already picked up on some of these guys throughout the week. We got some questions, but maybe a lot of you watching These videos haven't yet. And let's start with the most obvious of them all. It's going to be Rico Dowdle after running for over 200 yards, filling in for Chuba Hubbard. Now, we knew Rico was in a great spot. Didn't expect this. I mean, he's never done this before, obviously. He hasn't even been really ever given the lead role. Last year, like, we kept thinking it was going to happen for him in Dallas, and they wouldn't commit until way to the end of the season. And that's because they had so many injuries and other things going on here. And then he was signed here basically to back up Chuba Hubbard. He only got this start because of Chuba's calf injury. It looks like he has earned some more work. And so now I feel like, okay, what if Chuba comes back? Yeah, that means Chuba's going to be probably the lead back here, but this might turn into something more of a split because let's face it, Chuba Hubbard wasn't really that efficient before this injury. And you might see that, well, Trevor Etienne, the rookie, did get some carries too in this game. I mean, look, Rico needed a break, right? He needed a breather after running for so many yards. And the thing is that Rico stayed in on passing downs. Etienne didn't factor in at all as a receiver. I mean, Dowdle was basically treated like a workhorse, whether you think so or not. It doesn't mean that's going to continue, of course. Chuba, we have no idea how long this calf injury might linger, but man, if he's out again in week 6, you feel pretty good putting Dowdle in your starting lineup. Which, oh, by the way, next week, the Panthers, we get to face the Cowboys, which is not only a horror defense, but this would be the Rico revenge game. Now, I wasn't nearly as excited to tell people to pick up and or start Michael Carter of Arizona, but I said, okay, it's the Titans. He could be the lead back here. Of course, there's upside for a touchdown, and wouldn't you know it, he scored a touchdown. He was the lead back, 18 carries, and so while Amari Demercado had that one highlight-worthy play, not always for the best reasons, but look, Demercado is just going to be used on passing downs. His role hasn't changed. Michael Carter immediately stepped in to be the RB1 here, and you saw the usage. He is not only by far dominating the early down work, but also the short yardage and the goal line work. Pretty aggravating here that Bam Knight did get a goal line touch, and he cashed in. He scored a touchdown. You know what? Demercado should have had a touchdown if he didn't drop the ball, literally. And then Michael Carter did have a touchdown. But touchdowns are definitely fickle. It's hard to predict. The fact that Carter's being used in short yardage and goal line situations, other than that one that Bam Knight happened to get, makes you feel like he definitely has more upside here. On the day, Carter had 23 touches, which I'll admit is a little bit more than I expected. And like I said, it's the Titans. You have to keep that in mind. Although the Titans did win this game, so let's give them some credit. But still, it's not a fierce defense. On the other hand, next week they get the Colts, which are a good team, but this is not a fierce defense either. They're in fact averaging 4.5 yards per carried allowed on the ground to running backs so far this season. So Carter could have another nice game in store. Now, before I continue with an onslaught of tight end options on the waiver wire, let's get back to one more veteran wide receiver, a guy who could have been dropped because of the bye, Romeo Doubs, which a lot of people might say, how can you drop a player who just had 3 touchdowns in a game? Well, you can't if it's Romeo Doubs because that's what he does. He'll show up, he'll score 1, 2, maybe 3 touchdowns, and then he'll go away for a while. Went away because they were off in week 5, coming back week 6, but it's at home, it's the Bengals. Yeah, if you did hold Romeo Doubs, that was a good idea, and if he's still available, this is a good time to fire him up. Now, there's never a guarantee with Romeo Doubs. I mean, you just know the volatility is there. But on the other hand, that huge upside is there alongside that huge helmet. Matthew Golden has not yet had a big game and broken out. We thought he might be the one to do it last week, and no, it was Dobbs instead. Jaden Reed is not coming back anytime soon. Christian Watson's not coming back anytime soon. Dobbs is going to have a role here, whether you like it or not. All right, all you Bowers Kittle owners who have been streaming tight ends, let's see who's out there that could help you. Maybe if those other guys I already mentioned earlier aren't available, maybe you could get a hold of Evan Engram. Remember him, the trendy sleeper from the preseason? Like, I was in on Evan Engram. I thought he'd have a good role in a pretty good Broncos offense. Didn't do a whole lot early on, and then a calf injury has limited him. And so the last 2 weeks, hasn't done enough to make people want to pick up on him. He did finally score a touchdown in this game, but only 4 catches, 33 yards. He only got 4 catches in each of the past 2 games, but what he's getting are targets, a total of 13 targets over the last 2 weeks. And so this shows he is, as I thought he might be, heavily involved in the offense, and you figure that's just going to continue to grow as he actually gets to play in this new Broncos team. Should feel pretty good about Ingram also in week 6 because he gets to face what now is looking like possibly the worst overall team in the NFL. It's the New York Jets. But if there's one good thing about the Jets, it's their rookie tight end, Mason Taylor. I mentioned Taylor on Beat the Breakout a couple of weeks ago. So now Mason Taylor is just firmly an ad if you need tight end because the targets are absolutely there. And as I keep saying, don't want to belabor this point, but the Jets have no wide receiver depth, and that's why Mason Taylor has basically become the number 2 guy there behind Garrett Wilson. A team high, in fact, 9 receptions this week. And the target share for a tight end is actually kind of crazy. He got 12 this week, and you can see how it steadily has gone up from week to week. Of course, his first game in the NFL, only 1, and then 2 targets, and then we go from 6 to 7 to 12. By my math, if that pattern continues, exactly the way it's been going, that means by the time your fantasy final comes around, he'll have exactly 96 targets in that game. I'm not sure if that math adds up, but look, the point is Taylor's getting targeted a ton. You want that at tight end. You need that at tight end, so Mason Taylor's looking like a pretty good option. And last week, I also discussed tight end Theo Johnson for the New York Giants. And sure enough, here we go. Caught another touchdown. In fact, he did it twice this time. So Theo Johnson has been basically the go-to for Jackson Dart, who, let's face it, his darts are pretty short targets, right? He's not going to be a guy who's throwing it deep. He's either going to find the first read that he's got in front of him, or he's going to take off and run. And that's why in week 5, Theo Johnson, the tight end, tied for the team lead with 6 receptions on 7 targets. Now, you just know that you're not getting big yardage here, unlike a Darren Waller, let's say, or maybe a Tucker Kraft, who will run those deeper routes. Theo Johnson is just hanging around in those very short routes. And so he's pretty much touchdown dependent, and he's not going to score a touchdown every single week. But he's definitely going to be an end zone target, and he's a threat here. So if that's what we're looking for, I prefer him more in a non PPR format, let's say a half PPR format. But look, if you're getting deep here and those other tight ends are gone, Theo Johnson has now jumped onto the radar. And then finally, I couldn't leave Taysom off, guy who's never been off the radar completely. We've been waiting for it. Taysom Hill is back. Yes, he is. And he is doing Taysom things. He completed a pass for 19 yards. He carried the ball 6 times. In fact, surprisingly, the only thing he didn't do was catch a pass in this game. It won't take long. I'm not even going to speculate as to when and how you might want to use Taysom Hill or why, but you already know there's going to be in another week or two, let's say maybe it'll take 3. When you least expect it, Taysom Hill will have one of those 40-point games when he's on everybody's bench, but at least have him on yours. All right, that's just the beginning of our week 6 coverage to help you win in fantasy football. We're going to have starts in everything you need to win and to continue rolling on throughout the football season. It's all here in this playlist.